Get that crying baby out of here. This is not a daycare. The words cut through the air like a knife, sharp, cruel. The elegant hum of jazz seemed to mock the moment. Forks froze. Heads turned. In the center of the room, billionaire Richard Langston sat frozen, not because he didn't hear the insult, but because he didn't know what to do. His 11-month-old son Theo wasn't fussing or whimpering. He was screaming, fists clenched, face red, as if the world had betrayed him. Richard Langston, worth $3.8 billion according to Forbes, had negotiated ruthless mergers and dismantled rivals with a glance. Yet here, in a dining room filled with Manhattan's elite, he looked powerless. Sweat pooled near his collar. He tried everything, pacifier, bottle, even his assistant's help. Nothing worked. The whispers started. Guests shifted uncomfortably. A public relations nightmare was unfolding. And then she walked in. From behind a velvet curtain, a young waitress stepped forward. A simple ponytail, white sneakers, crisp apron, and eyes that didn't flinch. "Let me try," she said softly. The manager shook his head, muttering about rules. Richard didn't even glance at him. He just nodded, desperate. She approached slowly, arms open, voice gentle like a lullaby. Within seconds, silence. Not forced, not awkward. The kind of silence that felt like peace. People stared in disbelief. The woman who wasn't supposed to matter had just become the most important person in the room. Her name was Amara Johnson. She wasn't even supposed to work that shift. She had covered for her roommate who had an exam, needing the extra hours to help pay the light bill. That was Amara's life, adjusting, adapting, surviving, even when no one noticed. At 23, she studied psychology at NYU during the day and served at Maison Lenox by night, a high-end French restaurant where customers rarely looked her in the eye. She had grown used to the microaggressions, the forced smiles, the "can I speak to someone else" glances. But she carried herself with dignity because her mother had taught her, you walk with grace, even when they won't give you the floor. What no one knew, not the diners, not her manager, was that Amara had volunteered for 3 summers at a children's grief camp. She had held toddlers who had lost parents, soothed panicked 8-year-olds, and taught teenagers to breathe through pain. She was more than a waitress. She was trained in compassion, and that night she stepped forward, not to be noticed, but to serve something greater than food. She gave the room what money could never buy, humanity. But 30 minutes earlier she had been humiliated. While serving a group of wealthy men, one with silver hair sneered, "Guess they'll let anyone in these days." "You must be a diversity hire." His friends laughed. Amara froze, spine straight, face calm, but her eyes said everything. "Would you like lemon with that?" she asked evenly. He smirked, waved her off, and added, "Smile more. You people have such pretty teeth." The table roared. Amara walked away into the locker room. She didn't cry at first. She just stared at her reflection under the fluorescent lights, pulse pounding. Then a single tear slipped, not because the insult was new, but because it was so normal. How many times had she swallowed moments like this? She wiped her face, straightened her name tag. Dignity didn't wait for justice. She carried it with her. And when the baby cried, she was ready. Theo's cries weren't just noise. They were grief. His mother had died 3 months earlier, and since then, Richard had been balancing boardrooms with midnight feedings. Tonight, he was unraveling. Amara saw it. Not the billionaire, not the suit, but a father breaking. She knelt beside Theo. No baby talk, no theatrics. Just presence. She lifted him gently, letting his head rest against her shoulder, guiding him into the rhythm of her breath. The screaming melted into hiccups, then silence. The room was stunned. Even the music seemed to pause. Some stared in awe. Others whispered judgments. A man muttered, "Kids always calm down for the help." A woman in silk whispered, "She must have been a nanny before." But others were moved, even recording the moment, sensing it was bigger than gossip. Amara didn't respond to any of it. She only held Theo steady and calm. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do in a noisy world is simply care. Later, Richard approached her, awkward and unsure. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're welcome," she replied, still rocking Theo. "She's been gone 3 months," Richard murmured. His mom. It's been hard. I'm sorry, Amara said gently. Loss doesn't follow a schedule. He looked at her, really looked. What's your name? Amara. It means grace. Richard nodded slowly. You calmed him like no one else has. Not even me. I didn't do anything special, she said. I just held him. Sometimes, Richard whispered. That's everything. That night, after the restaurant closed, Richard waited near the coat check. He looked far from the untouchable CEO. You handled him like you've done this 100 times, he said. My mom was a nurse, Amara explained softly. She worked hospice, cared for kids in our building. I learned early how to hold a crying child, how to breathe slow until they breathed with me. She passed last year. COVID complications. Richard's grip on Theo tightened. I'm so sorry, Amara shook her head. You don't need to be. I carry her with me every time I help someone breathe again. The next morning, restless and moved, Richard called the restaurant. I want to speak with Amara, he told the manager. I'd like to offer her a position as my son's caregiver. The manager hesitated, fumbling about policies and diversity initiatives. Richard cut him off. She was the only one who saw my son as a person, not a problem. That's not something you train. That afternoon, Richard returned not with bodyguards, but with Theo and an envelope containing a formal offer. Full-time salary, benefits, tuition support. Amara was stunned. Richard spoke simply. If you'll help raise my son, I promise to never treat you as anything less than the person who saved him. She thought about it. She visited her mother's grave. She said yes, not for the money, but for Theo. 2 weeks later, she stood in Richard's penthouse overlooking Central Park. It was beautiful, but cold, too quiet for a child. Richard greeted her himself. No assistance, just a father. Theo crawled toward her instantly, reaching with tiny hands. Her days changed. She no longer carried trays or dodged insults. She cared for a child who felt safe in her arms. And slowly the penthouse changed too. Toys left out without guilt. Laughter filling high ceilings. Richard began coming home earlier, sitting on the floor, asking questions, learning how to be a father. During nap times, they talked about parenting, about grief. Amara shared her dream of opening a center for children who lost too much too soon. Richard nodded. We'll make that happen, he said. They both carried grief, different but heavy. For Richard, it lingered in the empty side of the bed. For Amara, in her mother's last voicemail. But together, they learned that grief isn't a tunnel you move through. It's a room you learn to live in. And with each other, that room grew warmer. One day, Theo took his first steps toward Amara. She cried, holding him close. Richard watched and whispered, You've changed everything. No, Amara smiled. You just stopped running from it. And maybe that was the truth. Sometimes the people society overlooks are the ones who save us. Sometimes Grace walks in wearing sneakers, carrying burdens unseen, and still chooses kindness. And sometimes, the life you thought had shattered is rebuilt through the most unexpected hands.